I almost didn't record this. I sat here for a long time before I pressed anything. Just sat. The way you do when you're not sure the words are going to come out right. And you're not sure it matters anymore whether they do. My name is Eleanor Marsh. I'm 83 years old, and I have a feeling not the dramatic kind, just the quiet, settled kind that I do have an enormous amount of time left to say the things I've been carrying around. So, here I am. I was born in a small house in rural Ohio, fourth of 6 children. My mother smelled like flour and something I could never name. My father didn't say much, but when he laughed, the whole room changed. I've been thinking about that laugh lately, how I haven't heard it in 60 years, and I can still feel it in my chest. I've had a long life, a full one, people say, and they're right, I think. But full doesn't mean without regret. Full just means there was a lot of time to do things wrong, and not always enough time to understand why. The first thing I kept doing for most of my life was rushing past the ordinary moments because I was always waiting for the important ones. I remember when my daughter Cora was about 7. She used to come into the kitchen on Saturday mornings and just talk about nothing, about a dream she had, about a girl at school, about whether turtles could feel lonely. And I was always half listening, always had something on the stove, or something turning over in my mind, some problem I was trying to solve that I can't even remember now. I can't remember the problems, but I remember the look on her face when she finally stopped coming in. She didn't stop all at once. It happened slowly, the way most losses do. One Saturday she came in, and I was distracted, and she stood there for a moment, and then just wandered back to her room, and I told myself I'd make it up to her later. That afternoon, maybe, that weekend, there was always going to be a later. She's 54 now. We're close, Cora and I. I want to be clear about that. But there is a version of her childhood that I missed while I was standing right there in it, and I've never quite forgiven myself for that. I spent a long time being angry at my husband, Gerald, 31 years of marriage, and I'd say maybe 12 of them I was holding onto something, some argument, some way he'd let me down, something he didn't say when I needed him to say it. I kept the account, you know, the way women especially are taught to keep the account quietly, never forgetting. Gerald died in 1998, heart attack. He was 71 years old, and he went quickly, which the doctors said was a mercy, and I've decided to believe them. After he was gone, I kept waiting to feel the relief of it, the relief of not carrying all that old weight. It didn't come. What came instead was this strange, horrible clarity that so much of what I'd held against him I couldn't even fully reconstruct it anymore. It had felt enormous when I was living inside it, But from the outside, from the place where he was simply gone and I was still here, it just looked like time, wasted time, mine and his both. He was a flawed man. I'm not pretending otherwise, but he was my man, and I spent years being right about things instead of being with him. And right didn't keep me warm. Right didn't sit across from me at the kitchen table. Right was just a story I told myself, and he wasn't around to hear the ending. I worked for 30 years as a bookkeeper for a lumber company. It wasn't what I'd imagined for myself when I was young. I had notions, the way young people do. But life moved the way it moved, and I took the job, and I was good at it. And then it was just what I did. For a long time I told people I didn't mind, and I believed it when I said it. But there were moments, usually in the car, driving home, the radio on low where something would surface. Some feeling I didn't have a name for. Not misery. Nothing so clear as that. Just a kind of distance from myself. A sense that somewhere along the way I'd agreed to something without fully meaning to. I never did anything about it. That's not a confession I make proudly. I just let those moments pass, turned up the radio, made dinner, went to bed, and the next day was another day at the lumber company. I'm not saying I should have quit. I'm not saying anything so simple as that. I'm just saying that I stopped asking the question. And when you stop asking the question long enough, you forget you ever had one. I had a friend named Vivian. We met in our 30s, and we were close in the way women become close when they're raising children and exhausted, and they find someone who understands without needing everything explained. We had a falling out over something I genuinely cannot fully reconstruct. Something to do with a misunderstanding, and then both of us being too proud, and then months turning into years the way they do. I picked up the phone once, got as far as dialing the first few numbers, and then I put it down. I don't know why. Stubbornness, maybe, or just the fear that too much time had passed and she'd be cold, and I wouldn't know how to handle that. Vivian died in 2019. I found out through her daughter, who was kind enough to reach out. I've thought about that phone call, about what it would have cost me to finish dialing, and I know the answer. Of course, it would have cost me nothing at all, but it didn't feel that way at the time, and by the time it did, it was too late. And that's the whole story right there. When my grandchildren were growing up, I was better. I want to say that. I'd learned a few things by then. I listened more. I let the Saturday morning conversations go where they needed to go. But I noticed something else by then, something I hadn't expected. I'd spent so much of my life worrying about what other people thought of me, the neighbors, the women at church, people whose opinions I genuinely could not tell you today. I dressed for them. I edited myself for them. I made choices based on a kind of invisible audience that I'd constructed in my own mind. And at some point, I looked around and realized the audience had gone home. Not cruelly, not all at once, just gradually, the way the light changes in late afternoon. The people I'd been performing for had their own lives, their own troubles. They hadn't been watching the way I'd imagined. And even when they had been, it hadn't mattered the way I thought it would. All that careful management, all that shrinking and adjusting. And for what? I'm 83. I sleep a little later than I used to. My knees are honest with me in ways the rest of me hasn't always been. I have a garden that I can't keep up with the way I'd like, and a cat named Theodore who is equally unreliable. I'm not afraid. I want to say that plainly. I've had time to sit with the idea of ending, and it doesn't frighten me the way it used to. What stays with me, what I'm still working on, even now, is the wish that I had been more present for my own life while I was living it. Not braver, necessarily, not more successful, not more impressive, not just there, actually there, in the kitchen on a Saturday morning, listening to my daughter talk about turtles, in the car, not turning up the radio, on the phone, finishing the dial. If you're watching this, and you're younger than I am, which at this point is almost everyone, I am not going to tell you what to do with that. That's not why I pressed record. I pressed record because I had these things inside me, and I wanted to say them out loud before I couldn't anymore. That's all this is. Just an old woman saying the quiet parts out loud. If anything I said stayed with you, I'd be glad to know. Not because I need to hear it, just because it's a strange thing, talking into a camera alone in a room. It helps to think someone was on the other side. Take care of yourselves and each other.